Happy Valentine's Day. What a perfect day to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. If there was ever a holiday filled with hope and heartbreak, it's today. So a year ago, when I decided to launch this podcast, I realized I had a lot to learn. And what I've learned is I still have lots more to learn. Think about our guests, and when I think about them, I realize how inspiring, how smart, how insightful, and just amazing they've been. I mean, they've added so much to the conversation around heartbreak, hope, human resilience, and happiness. Many times I've had my preconceived notions challenged. Other times they have lit up a path that I wouldn't have even known was an option. But each and every one of our guests have been really necessary to our journey, exploring heartbreak and hope. Not only have I learned an awful lot from our inspiring guests, but I've learned this past year a lot about myself. I've learned that I absolutely love hosting this podcast. I've learned that there's such complexity to the human heart and to emotion. And I've learned about myself that my heart is open. And I've learned that I could choose happiness and love every day. And I admit it's not the easiest choice to make every day, but you can make it and it works. One of the other things I've learned is how wonderful it is to have such a terrific audience. When I launched this show last year, it was my hope, my goal to offer information that you could actually use to better your lives. But I didn't expect so many people to reach out with their own stories about how supported they felt when they listened to the show. That's been the sweetest surprise and really makes working on this and moving forward worthwhile. In fact, it's because so many of you have reached out and shared with us that you wished you'd known some of these things before diving into a relationship or marriage or before getting divorced that we decided to build today's episode around that idea. So this Valentine's Day, I want to thank you for your love, for your support this past year. I hope you'll stay with us as we continue this conversation. And I want you to always feel that you could reach out with questions or even provide solutions. And I particularly want to thank you for the inspiration for this episode. Now, without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito, the show that explores how to build up or break down any relationship with confidence, clarity, and compassion. With the 1-year anniversary of Heartbreak and Hope upon us, we thought it'd be a good time to reflect. Our podcast set out to, and I believe and hope delivered, insights, anecdotes, and guidance from many sources. And I included along the way my own perspective as to how to best thrive through any stage of a relationship. In my never-ending goal to explore the heartbreak and hope of relationships of all kinds, I reached out to clients whose opinion I value to get their perspective. As most of you know, and as I've talked about, I've been a divorce lawyer for almost 43 years. And what I've learned is divorce happens, despite the vows of until death do we part. Sometimes divorce is inevitable and predictable, and sometimes you never saw it coming. But along the way, I've had the opportunity to meet clients and experience life with clients in a way that is a unique window into their life. And I've reached out to some of those people that I trust, became very close to and fond of. And I asked them about what they wish they knew before they were married and before getting divorced. Because one thing's for sure, I never represented anyone who didn't think about those issues. So first of all, let me thank my clients who took the time to share with me your reflections. I often hear from my clients their thoughts about the podcast, their comments, and they've been open and honest. And I'm grateful for that because I've learned more from them than I think that they learned from me. But before we speak about, and before I share with you some of my former clients' perspective on what they wish they knew before they were married and before getting divorced, I thought maybe I'd share with you some of my own. I was married at 37 years of age. That was 30 years ago. Now, you would think that by then I would have figured out how to pick a suitable partner and the chances of success would be on your side. I mean, we always hear if you wait longer, you find a more suitable partner. At that point, I had my career well established. My life was going in a positive direction. And again, I thought by waiting, everything would work out. Not true. At that point, I had been a divorce lawyer for about 14 years. I was a partner at a law firm. I had dated somewhat, been engaged once before. I thought I knew a few things. I didn't. And I married somebody who on paper checked the boxes. He was about 41. He was a physician. He had never been married. Looked good to me, but I didn't know a lot, and I wish I did. What I wish I knew, and it's so clear to me now as I enter in this phase of my life with love and a partner, that common values and family matter. One of my clients that I reached out to, we'll call him Chris, shared with me when I asked him about things that he wishes he knew before getting married. He said he wished he observed closer the relationship, the marriage between his parents and his ex-wife's parents. So I think from your family, you get core values. And if they're not aligned, I think you're going to have some problems, or if you haven't worked through those issues. So let me give you some examples. I came from a family that was, well, whose family isn't dysfunctional? My father had mental health issues. My mother struggled on her own for other reasons, and it was a difficult childhood. However, they had fundamental integrity with the dysfunction and with the challenges we had, which were extensive. My husband came from a family on the surface. That Christmas card, I kept going back there. They looked great. They were married. My father-in-law was a professional. They had a house, which to me was a big deal. We never had a home. 5 children. I thought that this was a family that functioned the way, the American dream functions. The truth is, when you peel back the layer, and I would urge anyone before you get married to peel back that layer, my family, which on the surface was very dysfunctional and had many problems, had much stronger core values and family values than his family. I didn't have the emotional maturity to understand it at that point. So that's something I really, really wish I knew. I wish I understood that integrity matters. Not that I'm so, holier than thou, or I'm so much better than anybody else, but I think I was raised with the fundamental knowledge of what's right from wrong. And if you haven't been aligned in that regard, it's not probably going to be a good match. The other thing I wish I learned, and I'm sort of ashamed to admit this, but at 37, when I got married, on the surface, it was great. Partner in a law firm. I was aging pretty well. I was very close with my family. I remain very close with my sister and brother to this day. I had friends, a social life. On the surface, it was great. But self-respect and self-worth probably weren't my best qualities. I didn't know it at the time. I thought they were, because I had the trappings of what one would perceive as self-respect and self-worth. But in reality, especially as I look back, my therapist once said to me, "Why did you think taking crumbs was okay?" I didn't think I was taking crumbs. Self-respect and self-worth matter. And if you haven't gotten to a point where you are self-respecting and can set boundaries and establish your self-worth, you probably should examine those, no matter how much you love your partner. Along those lines, I wish I knew before I got married, and this is a hard one to admit. Nobody cares if you cancel your wedding, even if it's 2 weeks before your wedding date. Don't get married because you think you'll be embarrassed if you don't. In a month or so before my marriage, every fiber of my being knew there were problems with integrity, with honesty, with values. And I don't want to disparage my former husband. He did the best he could. And in many ways, he did great. And he was, in many ways, a good partner and a good parent. But his value system and his level of integrity was far different than mine. And I should have canceled my wedding. But I had been engaged once before many years ago. I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to, for a minute, see that my Christmas card life wasn't perfect. And I didn't. And I think back and I think, what was I thinking? Another thing I wish I knew before I got married that you should unpack your bags before you get into a new partnership or relationship. What does that mean? Well, for me, and I look back, you really should work out your issues before you get married. So for me, I was raised by a father who was damaged emotionally, had mental health challenges. He was brilliant, and he did the best he could, and I loved him for that. But he was a handful, not a secret. In fact, when I gave his eulogy at his funeral, I started out with saying, let's face it, he was difficult. But the truth is, what I didn't understand before I got married, and I would urge everyone to understand this, that you marry who you know. So if you are raised in a situation of dysfunction or emotional challenges, and you haven't really worked that through, the chances are you're going to marry somebody with those same issues. Although my husband looked entirely differently, physically, professionally, personality, demeanor, completely different than my father, at the core, the damage and the mental health issues were the same. It was the same fundamental self-destructive person in completely different packaging. I now could spot that a million miles away, but I couldn't then. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the therapeutic intervention that I needed. And again, they both did the best they could. And I have no regrets about my marriage, about who I married, but I do now understand that wasn't a good choice. The fifth point that I reflect upon when I think about things I wish I knew before I got married is just don't pretend it's okay when it's not. If it doesn't feel right, it's not okay. And what I mean by that is if your instincts and your experience tell you something's really wrong here, rethink, no matter how close it is to the wedding. Now, I know a lot of people get cold feet and people say, you'll just get through it. It's okay. That was not my experience because I wouldn't have even told anybody if I got cold feet. I was so invested in getting married, making a family, taking care of my parents and some of my other family members that it would not have even occurred to me to tell anybody that I wasn't sure. And I really wasn't, but I pretended. I always said if I wasn't going to be a lawyer, I would have been an actress. Boy, I could have won an Academy Award in those months leading up to the marriage because I pretended it was okay, and it really wasn't. And again, no regrets. Life unfolded in a way that it should have. It's worked out beautifully for me. It's sad to me that my former husband ended up passing away because of choices he made. And I do believe he did the best he could. And I bet you if you asked him, he probably would have said he should have listened to his inner voice too. I don't think that was unique to me. And along those lines, if it doesn't feel right and you say to yourself, well, if I marry him or her, they'll change. I'll save them. Doesn't happen. You can only save yourself. And that's something else I learned. So those are things I wish I knew before I got married. I have clients that I want to share with you about their thoughts. Let me go back to my client who we will call Chris. This is a client who's gone through extraordinary pain with regard to his children. The former wife has alienated his children in a way that is excruciating. He is fighting and will fight till the end of the world to rehabilitate his relationship with his children, and I don't think it's through any fault of his own. He's done a lot of reflecting, as you can imagine, and he is the client, Chris, that talked about understanding his family's values in marriage versus his ex-wives. And what he says is, even though on the surface, both of the respective parents had successful marriages, the difference was that they both witnessed two different types of partnerships. He came from a family with expression and affection, and his former wife's parents weren't really nice to each other. And he talks a lot about the fact that his parents put their marriage first. It was the family foundation. And his former wife's parents did not do that. They had a lot of conversations, and he wishes they really explored the issue of whether or not a couple is the primary foundation of the family or not, whether or not the children are the primary foundation. And he talks a lot about the fact that he wishes he understood or explored that parents pass away, children grow up and leave, but the foundation needs to be the couple for a strong union for a family. Let me switch to one of my other male clients, a client we'll call Jay, who is extremely positive, bright, fun, articulate, despite what he's gone through. Jay's in his 40s now, has children, and he says he wishes he knew about narcissistic partners and narcissistic personality disorder. Now, that's interesting to me because when you get married, you're not exactly studying DSM and psychological disorders, right? Who is? We might know like anxiety and depression. As you evolve in life, as you live with somebody, many people have said, I didn't realize they were bipolar. I didn't realize they had a personality disorder. Well, Jay says, I wish I understood what a narcissistic partner was. A lot of narcissistic partners, they love bomb you in the beginning. They do everything for you. They make you feel so special. If you've ever been love bombed, and I would say I have been, I think a lot of people have been, your instinct is, this isn't good. My gut feels wrong. That is one thing I've always picked up on. It just doesn't feel right to move real quickly. There's something unnatural about that. But this guy didn't follow his gut. He got seduced by the love bombing, and it was disastrous. He was isolated from his family. He was seduced into believing things that were pathologically not true. He just was sucked into a life that he didn't even recognize himself. That's an interesting thing. And again, I would think most people don't really think about having your partner analyzed psychologically or psychiatrically. But if you've been married to somebody with psychological disorders, psychiatric disorders, I bet you think differently next time. Or I think what happens is when you enter into a relationship later in life, you don't need a psychiatric or psychological evaluation. You recognize these things. They just jump at you. I could safely say that having entered dating after about 10 years of being on my own and entering into a partnership at this point in my life is very different because I can instinctively notice or tell if there was a disorder, a problem. Sometimes it took me a few months, maybe even a little longer, but you know what you know, and you're able to walk away from it as opposed to trying to fix it when you're younger. Because what happens when you're older, again, the gift of age, and that's why I do encourage people, as several of my guests have, Dr. Dwayna Welch, Dr. Francine Russo, I do encourage you to find love second time around after 50 and 60, because what happens at that point, you don't care about most people. You don't care about a wedding or a plan or buying a house. You're not on this sort of course. You really just want a partner in a relationship so you could walk away easier. You could set boundaries easier. You're not as afraid. I know for me, I thought, listen, after my marriage fell apart, and it really fell apart big, what the hell? I mean, nothing else worse could happen. So it freed me and it liberated me to open myself to what, and I hate to sound so corny, but what the universe had to offer. And it was a lot. It was a different world. So that's really something I think that that's the gift of age, the gift of second partnerships. The universe has a lot to offer you if you open yourself up and if you don't say, this is the path I'm on. We have this tendency when we're younger to, checkbox, career, marriage, family, children, and we're in a lane and we don't want to get off. I think that when you're older, there are no lanes. There's 20 lanes. And if you let whatever lane take you wherever you need to go, I think it's really a different experience. And for me, it's turned out to be the most liberating time of my life and freeing time of my life because I have nothing to fear. I don't think that you need couples counseling before marriage. I do think if you have anything unresolved, you need counseling before you get married. Because I think the trick is this. If you've had therapy, counseling, or you've worked out your kinks, You don't need the other person to go. You'll know when it's right and when it's wrong. Certainly communication is never a problem. And if a therapist or a counselor helps you communicate better, that's great. But I believe it's about your responsibility to yourself, because I think you see those problems and see those red flags, set the boundaries, act self-respecting if you've worked out your issues. The other thing I've learned in age is you can't make somebody else work it out. You can't make somebody else be who they're not. I think your only obligation is to yourself, and you have to have the strength to walk away or set boundaries. One thing I found, again, this sort of second phase of my life in dating, is setting boundaries is a beautiful thing. When you are younger, people may have a tendency to look the other way because they want that goal. They want a marriage, they want a family, they want happily ever after. So this is one thing I hear all the time with clients when I ask them about when they met. Now that I look back, I saw this, I should have seen this, I turned away because I was focused on the wedding, not the husband. I was focused on the event, the job, the house, having children. So again, I think a gift of age is that you write the story as you want to write it. And if I could give any advice to anyone exploring their life with someone or without somebody, it would be learn to set healthy boundaries. Not to say put up walls. There's a big difference. Set healthy boundaries. And my experience is when you share those boundaries, somebody will respond appropriately or not. So they're not walls, they're not rules, they're things that I need. So if I was dating somebody and they wanted to date other people, and this happens to me actually, I said, that's okay. I don't make judgment on that, but that won't work for me. My job is not to tell you what to do and not do. For me, at this level, it had been a little bit into the relationship. I'm not interested in that, but you do you. And that was so liberating. And that person came back, and that's a story for another day. And there's a happy ending to it, but we'll talk about that another time. But it wasn't, you can't tell people what to do. You can only say what you need. And it wasn't, when you say what you need, it's not about control. I wasn't trying to control this other person. I wasn't trying to tell him what to do. I was saying, this is what I need. But if you need that, go do it. It's okay. I'm not angry. I'm not even hurt. And those are the kinds of things that when you express them, and they could be simple things like, I need, to sleep till 7 o'clock in the morning. You want to get up at 5, but it's okay. You do you. This is what I need. So they're not rules. They're not walls. They're just expressing who you are, what you need, and seeing if you could have a respect for each other. So my client, who I will call Happy Divorcee, she's somebody who got married first time in her 20s, and she said she wished that she knew something that she recently learned, that the brain does not finish maturing until our late 20s. And she said making a lifelong commitment until then is something she wouldn't encourage. She and a number of my clients that responded said, I would insist on getting a prenuptial agreement. That is interesting to me because when it comes to finances and separating financing, it's stressful, it's expensive, and it's difficult. So that was a very common theme of many of our responses. Many, many responses. Get a prenup, get a prenup, get a prenup. And I think that's a little easier said in hindsight than it is going to a marriage, especially when you're younger. First of all, when people get married, many times they don't have that much. So people are speaking from a position of having accumulated something. So you're not thinking like that. So it's a little, in hindsight, sure. But I just don't think that's really, in reality, what people do before they get married for the most part. This client is a client who I represented, 25 years ago. I love this client. I loved his family. He every year remembers me Christmas time. This was a beautiful family, a beautiful experience. And, what he said he wishes he knew before getting married is that life can be so complicated and tie one down in many ways, including supporting them with our complicated matrimonial laws, which don't make sense to him. So when you enter into a marriage, I think he just never foresaw that his life would be defined by an obligation that he didn't even know he made. I'm paraphrasing. And I thought that was very, very interesting. I have a client who said I could use her name, Kathleen. I love this client. This is a client who took her marriage vows very seriously over 15 years, ended up with a tragic situation with her husband's mental health for a number of reasons. She's got the best attitude of anyone I know. And again, I've become very, very fond of her. What she says, and again, she was married over 50 years, is she says she wishes she knew how important it was to have an independent income stream from her husband. She was in a very traditional situation where her husband supported the family very well. She said, although she got to live her dream of being a stay-at-home mother and doing all the volunteer positions that she wanted, she wished she would have had some economic independence. And she believes economic independence is an absolute necessity now. So those are some of the observations that people wish they knew before they got married. I hope that helps you if you're interested in or you're thinking about getting married. Just things to think about. I'm throwing them out there, so perhaps you think about them. Now, we also asked clients, and I've given some thoughts to, things I wish I knew before getting divorced. And that's something that I'm in people's lives every day about, because the first thing that happens when you see a divorce lawyer is you have a consultation. I've said on this podcast, and I've said repeatedly, a consultation, I believe, is the most important session you will have with a lawyer. I don't discourage you from getting more than that one, because the divorce laws are one thing. Strategy, emotional intelligence is another thing. And when you have a divorce lawyer, that's what you need. You need an emotionally intelligent strategist that knows the law. Before getting divorced is something that I examine and explore in great detail with people every day, and I have for almost 43 years. And because of that, and because I do this for a living, not a whole lot I needed to know before I got divorced, because, by the time I got divorced, at that point, I had been a divorce lawyer for over 25 years, and I saw every configuration of divorce. But I do wish I knew one thing. I wish I knew it was okay to get divorced. Nobody cares. I thought the world was going to crumble. The grounds were going to part. It was going to be a disaster. I thought the whole world would shout and look at me and point at me with shame. Nobody cared. And they cared for about 15 minutes. There was probably a few phone calls. Can you believe? Did you hear? But beyond that, nobody's that interested. And I wish I knew that, because it was fear of embarrassment, fear of people seeing the broken glass behind the curtain that made me stay married longer than I should. So that is something I do wish I knew before getting divorced. To answer that question, I think we're best going back to clients who weren't divorce lawyers and didn't have fortunate experience of working divorce through with people for their profession. What Kathleen, my client and friend who was married for over 50 years, says is she wishes she had paid better attention to the bills, the finances, better understood the consequences. And she said, I thought this was funny, I wish I knew what my husband's passwords were, because even establishing a cell phone account was difficult. So I thought that was funny, but true. How many people just don't think to ask? And when the marriage is good, they certainly would share them with you. So I thought that was interesting insight. My client, Gaya, a lovely, lovely woman who was here from another country and had a lot of challenges negotiating divorce. She wishes she understood that getting divorced in a country which isn't your country of origin, she wishes she understood how the local culture influenced the laws and might go against divorce norms abroad. So divorce might look different in Italy than it does here. And she was working here as a professional, but her country of origin was different. And she just didn't understand that the laws usually mirror the cultural norms of the society that you live in. And that was unsettling to her. She wishes she knew that. She says 99% of divorces don't end up in a trial. It's probably closer to 97%. But that's a really interesting fact. That's something I tell people right up front. Relax. The chances of you going to trial are minimal. And she says if she understood that, she might have proceeded differently. She came to us after she had been represented by somebody else, so somebody didn't share that with her. But I think that's an interesting factual bit of information to know. And from her perspective, she felt there was little objectivity amongst judges, especially when it came to parenting rights. Again, this is her perspective. And she felt that the children's rights are exploited to get leverage when the ex-partner wants to get an advantage. But the kids are never happy in the process, and it's just a power dynamic that plays out to get a better deal. She was very frustrated by all this, and it was painful to her. I think she's in a much better place now, and she'll do great because she's a wonderful, lovely person. My client, who we will call Charlie, this is my client that I represented many years ago, who I still hear from every year, indicates that he wishes he knew before getting divorced, again, about the children, that the children get affected and brainwashed by one party or the other. And also, you never really get divorced because you're always connected. So divorce, he doesn't say this, my words, is sort of a piece of paper. You know, I remember after my marriage ended, my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law, was getting sick and dying. And of course, I called, and my ex-husband and I spoke very frequently and quite frankly cried together. And my daughter went down to see her, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember this. I remember saying, divorce isn't that day you get divorced. It's divorce by 1,000 cuts. Because you go from people who are your family, somebody I called mom, to you're not married anymore. And every event that happens, every wedding you're not invited to, every death, every event, it's divorced by 1,000 cuts. And what my client, who we'll call Charlie, says is that you're never really divorced. And he spoke a lot about the brainwashing. And along those lines, the brainwashing, I go back to my client who is involved in a case involving a lot of alienation. Well, Chris, he says he wishes he knew that it's scary to start the process. Interesting. Because once you start the process, I'm editorializing, the horse is out of the gate. I tell people that all the time. Nothing that'll polarize people like getting lawyers involved, right? So he wishes he knew that. He wishes he knew how brutal it would be. He wishes he knew that there's a right time to proceed, and moving forward quickly isn't necessarily the best way to go. And he said something, and I've talked to him about this, that I've often said to people. How marriage goes, the divorce goes. So basically, you divorce who you married. If you had a highly contentious marriage, you're going to have a highly contentious divorce. You don't have a highly contentious marriage and divorce somebody who's easygoing. So I think that's a really obvious thing. I say that all the time. Why did you think this would be easy? Look who you were married to. So he makes this observation that if during your marriage, your partner's family and friends are more important to them than you, it's going to remain so. Things don't change. You don't divorce somebody different than you were married to. So he also says picking the right attorney to represent you is everything. I hope that's a compliment to us. But I do think that's important. And I don't think that every attorney is a good fit for every client, and every client is a good fit for every attorney. My client, Jay, the one who says he wishes he knew about narcissistic personality disorder before he got married, he had an interesting situation. He was divorced and then reconciled with his former wife, probably for the sake of the children. One of the things he says he wishes he knew before the divorce is tell people don't reconcile, even if it's for the sake of the children. They'll be far better off. So I think what happens, and this is my editorializing, is that as we get away from a situation, it is either human nature or survival that we only remember good things, right? My marriage has now been over for, 12, 14, 15, I can't remember. And my former husband's been passed away 4 or 5 years. I literally don't remember anymore. But I don't remember bad things because I think that's our survival mechanism, right? So what happened to this client is he had been divorced or separated for a while, loved his children dearly, and there's always a lot of good things that happen. You could have had the worst marriage in the world, and if you're away from it long enough and you spend time together, you remember good things. You laugh. I remember a time after my marriage ended, and it wasn't an easy end. We were at visiting day at camp for my younger daughter, and my older daughter was there as well. And we had not had the best relationship. It wasn't expressively angry, but it was not close. That would be the understatement. And we ended up spending the day at visiting day at sleepaway camp. By the end of the day, we were laughing at the same stupid jokes that we laughed at. Our family dynamics sort of fell to this pattern of how it was. And, certainly reconciliation wasn't going to happen, but I thought, well, he wasn't that bad. So what happens, I think, is with distance and hindsight, you forget about things. And it's a little dangerous, I always say, to spend time with your ex-spouse because they don't look as bad. In reality, eventually, inevitably, those monsters come to haunt you again. The cracks are shown again. So for Jay, he did reconcile. He loved his children dearly. And the second separation has been contentious, disastrous, and vicious. And it's been sad. But I think what we forget is you must have liked something about them to marry them, right? So when you get married, you obviously like many things about your spouse. Then you get divorced and you realize things that weren't particularly healthy or good for the marriage. And then time goes on, you forget about the bad stuff and you remember, yeah, I kind of liked him. We had our own family unit. It kind of worked. It was fun. It was funny. We worked as a family. So that's when I say danger, 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 because people then sort of say, well, they weren't so bad. I'd like to be back with my family. My children will be happier even if they're grown. In my opinion, that never works because you get seduced or sucked in by the comfort and you forget the dysfunction and you forget how much you've grown from the end of the marriage. So I have a big warning sign when people tell me they're going to spend time with their ex-spouse and it wasn't so bad, because it's very easy to get seduced or sucked into the comfort of an old relationship. Inevitably, it will fail and it will be disastrous, but people don't see it because it's hard to go into a new relationship, right? It's hard. I mean, isn't it easier to kind of go back to something, you could put your sweats on, watch a movie, hang out, than somebody you have to really, put your best game on for? So I think that's really a dangerous place to go. Personally, that's what I've seen. That's my experience. That's my advice. My happy divorcee client, she says that she wishes she knew that if the divorce is not wanted by both parties, mediation isn't going to be really useful. I agree with her. I think this is a really insightful thing she says, that if you both don't want to be divorced, going to a mediator is not going to solve your problems because you're not invested in coming up with a solution and a resolution. And she does say having a great experienced lawyer is absolutely necessary and worth the extra money. I don't know if everybody would agree to that, but I think that if you both don't want an end, it's not going to end, whether or not you're in mediation or you have lawyers. You both have to want the end, and that's often not the case. People sometimes go to mediation thinking it's going to reestablish a connection in the marriage to save the marriage. If somebody is not open to that, you're punishing yourself. And I would urge our listeners to do something I wish I understood many, many years ago. Don't punish yourself. There's enough bad things that are happening in the world. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to hear painful things. Don't do that to yourself. I would encourage you to not ask questions you don't want answers to in mediation or therapy, because if it's not going to do you any good, don't beat yourself up. And those words become seared into your brain. So when you are in mediation or couples counseling before a divorce, and again, these are things we wish we knew before getting divorced, just to hear all the horrible things that you've done or your spouse perceives you've done, you're only hurting yourself. And it's hard to get those words out of your brain. So I would encourage you, if it's not salvageable, don't listen to that are going to scar you. Go to therapy and learn about yourself, but don't punish yourself, because that's painful. And it's hard for us to forget those words and see our lives through a different lens when we become healthy. So I leave you with these thoughts. Part of life's journey is learning. So while I'm hopeful that we brought issues, topics to your attention to think about if you're planning to be married or you're in that love, glow, happy space. The reality is, sad things may happen. Pain happens. It sounds corny and hokey, but it really is the human experience. You don't know joy unless you know sadness. So I would encourage you to accept the painful things that happen or the unsettling things that happened and use them to have you evolve into a better version of yourself. We set out, when we set up this podcast, to learn how to become better versions of ourselves. I have, in the last year, become a better version of myself by speaking so openly and honestly, something I never in a million years thought I would do. I came from a family where you never spoke about anything publicly. There was a lot of shame involved in our family situation, both from an economic point of view and a function point of view. So we never spoke. If my parents were alive, like right now, oh my God, I can't even imagine what they would be thinking. I can only imagine what they're doing right now, looking down on me saying, I can't believe you're discussing your business. But the truth is, for me, discussing my personal life, within respectful boundaries, sharing my story has helped me evolve. So I would encourage you, if you're in a great place, go for it. And if you're not, look at it as an opportunity to figure out how to be in a better place and end up in a better situation. Life, divorce, heartache is all part of life, but hope is what gets us through. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so more people can listen in to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito.